Helen and Pratik. So glad you could join me.
Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Brooke.
As you can tell, we've been talking about maturity models. Oh my, we've been talking about maturity models. And you know, this is great. And the reason I'm leaning over here is all my notes are on my iPad so that I could look at you and I don't have a second screen here where I am. So at least I've got something so I can look at my questions, I can look at anything you wrote, you know, and kind of be prepared here and not be an idiot, which I'm perfectly capable of being, as anyone knows me. Thank you so much for joining us here. Why don't you just take a minute or two and tell folks, each of you, about who you are in the AppSec world, you know, what you do for a day job and that sort of stuff. And maybe a little about your background, not your whole CV. Some of our CVs are way too long for that. You know, we want to talk about maturity models here, but if you could just briefly introduce yourself, I really appreciate it.
Helen, do you want to start?
Thank you. Sure. I'm Helen Umberger. I've been in security, compliance, and architecture for over 20 years, but only in heavily regulated industries like finance, insurance, and public utilities. I focus on financial applications and data security. Matter of fact, my obsession is data security. I've written about enterprise application integration, and I always think of data as a corporate asset. And I've done presentations for the SAP users group, ASUG, on the automation of GRC and compliance, focusing on data. And the question I focused on, that was Brooke's question, was the need for new and revised models. And my answers are all going to be about data. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Helen. My name is Pratik. I've been in the industry, in the security industry, for like close to more than a decade. It's been a decade and a half already. Mostly been in the technology sector, in the private sector. Started my career in academia. Most recently have been overseeing product security and GRC at a small tech firm. But have done a bunch of other work actually in security over the span of like a decade. Generally been involved with enterprise security, product security, application security, cloud security. On the GRC side, have established programs for companies, have worked on building teams, building capability, as well as also like developing policies and also operationalizing tooling. So have done both like the hands-on work, as well as also a lot of the managerial work pertaining to strategy and metrics collection and tracking those things. Yeah, and I'm based in the Bay Area and have been here over the past 11 years.
Thank you very much. And I just want to tell viewers, anybody in our industry, it moves very fast. If you've been around and doing something for 5 years, you're probably a senior, what they call, whatever the title is, senior security engineer, senior this, senior that. And if you've been around for, Helen, 20 years, oh my gosh. It doesn't really matter about your chronological age. Are you an elder in the craft? I think probably. You know, it's fast moving. So someone who's been around for 20 years has been around a long time and done a lot. Someone who's been around a decade or more than a decade is, you know, they're a practitioner. So thank you for joining me. Let's talk maturity models. You know, we're here. We've talked a little bit about, folks have talked, and I'm just signing into my iPad so I can look at my questions here. We've talked a little bit about scope, different people's ideas about scope. You know, why do we need them? You know, what about this sort of setup? We're setting everybody else up for the rest of the dialogue, because this dialogue is going to go on for another 3 hours plus. So, you know, what's important about maturity models that our listeners really need to hear from your perspective?
What I wanted to focus on is why we needed a new and a revised. And that's because I've been looking at all the new technologies, the AI, the machine learning, citizen development, robotic process automation. What I've noticed with all of these new types of development coming out is their entire focus is on the data. Matter of fact, the data is the application. And I think that's really really what is new about all this. And I want to focus on data into application mindsets that all of these include, because it's a difference from our old digital technologies that these new technologies are starting to make independent decisions without humans possibly, and they can risk the reputation of your company. And you really need to be having some kind of AppSec model in place that protects that. There's so many wonderful examples in the news, like Amazon's AI recruitment that had to be axed because it was misogynistic. How do you put those securities into your framework to prevent things like that from happening? I really want to bring up all of the things that these new technologies all have in common around the data, and how we need to add data security to the AppSec model in a way that we've never done it before. And that's what my focus has been on in the work groups. Did Patrick want to break in? I'll hog it. So, you got to break in.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I would say, and Brook, you may have already heard from others, already on this, but essentially, to me, a model, actually a maturity model when it comes to AppSec boils down to three main areas. Like I try to actually create one, or I target one, to focus on addressing three questions. So one is considering how mature is the organization that's in question here in terms of identifying and understanding the various security risks based on, let's say, the functionality of the software that they are developing. Now, this is provided that they are a software developer, that they are a software developer house, and things like that. The other question that I have faced and I've tried addressing whenever I've faced with this development of a maturity model is, how mature is the organization in arming the right folks, actually the right personnel, that are involved in actually the whole software development lifecycle, in terms of giving them the ability and the resources to design, to develop, and to deploy secure software, essentially. And the third one that I can think of is when it comes to the maturity model, what it is, in terms of building software, how would it allow actually building software in let's say in a standardized manner, in some kind of a repeatable manner, in something that would also involve using secure components. These days, most organizations, if not everyone, pretty much is heavily reliant on third-party software components. So that itself adds the risk, the third-party software risk as well, that they are absorbing. So what is it there that they are actually doing in terms of using secure components, as part of their software development lifecycle? Essentially, these are the three main questions that I always look for addressing when I'm at least, trying to actually kind of focused on developing a model. So that's my take.
So I'd like to break in here. I love all of those answers, but I think we are missing the fact of the citizen development. AppSec is responsible for the security of development for the entire company. So what if your development is not being done by developers? What if it's being done by your subject matter experts on the business side with that no code, low code? Foster's is predicting there's going to be a major headline security breach from citizen development. GitHub is noting that citizen development puts stuff in GitHub and they've been putting passwords in it. We have security training from any AppSec framework that covers our developers. It teaches them not to put passwords in the code, how to handle PII data, how to handle your databases, and worry about SQL injection and service accounts and stuff. But we're not teaching that to our citizen developers. They need to be brought into that AppSec framework. They need to get the security training on top of learning how to do that no code, low code, because we can't put that genie back in the bottle. The business loves this citizen development. They're not going to give it up. And they have too much access now to the data. So we need to bring them into the AppSec framework, and our framework has to be basically now flexible enough to handle more than just developers, so that we're protecting our security. Because everything you said about third party and safe components, that's even more important for citizen development, because we should be developing those pieces for them to just import into their stuff, so they're not doing it from scratch, and we've built in the security for them. That's why I really want to see this new framework, and I want it to address all these new technologies and trends.
Yep.
Terrific. And Maria Schwenger was kind enough to go through some of the models that are out there. But I think maybe listeners may not realize that some of them, like BSIMM, is a capabilities model. It doesn't really have a it has a progression of capabilities, but it's non-prescriptive. And then you have SAM, which is prescriptive on how you run the program, OWASP SAM.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to see in a model? I mean, you've spoken to this some, Helen, about data security and some other things, but how would you like to see this model from Purple Book shift things? Let me put it that way.
I like the OS model. I like the prescriptive bit, but it needs a little flexibility because the new technologies are so flexible and they may not be in the hands of developers. So I think it needs to be a blend of both of those, because you need to spread it out now to the business, and you need to find a way to make it digestible by the business, because they don't want to become security experts and they don't want to be developers, and yet they still want to create their own apps. So we need to find something that addresses our very technical people and our new citizen developers at the same time. I don't think any existing model covers all of that. And maybe it's too much scope, or maybe it has to have subsections, or I don't know, maybe it's too ambitious to put all in one model, but I really see the need for it.
Pratik, do you want to take us out? We have just a couple more minutes, and give us your thoughts on this or any other maturity model subjects, please.
Sure, definitely, Brooke. So I agree with Helen. I mean, I've used actually in my work actually that I've been involved with. I mean, I've generally done a combination. I've taken a hybrid approach. I've never completely relied on one or the other because of like having like certain things. I mean, like certain things are addressed, let's say, by BSIMM. Others are addressed more, let's say, effectively by OpenSAM. I mean, so it's always been a combination that I've taken. Whatever the environment was that I entered, how things were, depending on the maturity, depending on what things they had in place or not. I picked one actually that basically fit that particular thing. I would say OpenSAM at least offered the operational piece of it, which I didn't see much when it came to the BSIMM one. So when I say operational side of the practice, that would involve like managing, let's say, incidents, the operationalizing of things, even the environment, like hardening of the environment and things like that. So that particular component wasn't heavily emphasized, at least in BSIMM, from what I recall. And so OpenSAM was actually also factored in whenever at least I've tackled that. The other piece also that is missing sometimes, or at least not heavily emphasized, is like creation of, like, let's say, the intelligence piece, like when it comes to identifying attack patterns or models. I believe BSIMM has certain pieces that it touches on, but again, I think there is more work that needs to be done based on the nature of threats that we see that keeps evolving and things like that. I think it generally means that you have to keep it like a running document. I mean, you have to keep you can't just like accept the model as it is. There has to be an evolution and change. And the one that I would say, I mean, that goes along with in terms of updating, I think would work best. I don't see one currently that fits the bill for every organization. So typically it's like whatever actually you pick and choose that works for you, I think should actually, and which is comprehensive enough, should be the best approach. So that's my take.
Thank you both so much for your wisdom, your depth and breadth of experience, what you bring, and really thank to all the panelists who've been in my moderated hour for just being who you are and caring about this thing we call AppSec and how we do it and what we do. Because as I've said many times, it's very complex. And I know I asked a really silly question. Well, I can't just turn on a tool. You can't. And you all know that, but maybe the listeners don't. And so, thanks for helping people climb in to the length and breadth of not just AppSec maturity, but AppSec itself. Really appreciate it. And to all the people who came in this hour.